Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another session of literary and cultural theory. Today, we will look into the key moments of literary theorizing, the principal figures and critics who contributed to the emergence of different schools of thoughts. Let's get started. There existed a body of theory about literature, critical theory, that predates the literary criticism of individual works as we see today. The root of this can be traced back to the Greek or Latin originals. So, one of the earliest work of theory that we could cite would be Aristotle's Poetics and Rhetoric. Now, let's take a look at the key propositions by Aristotle. Aristotle talked about the nature of literature itself. In fact, he was the first critic to develop a reader-centric approach to literature. He focused extensively on tragedy. He elaborated on the concept of mimesis, which is the art of imitation of an action, catharsis, which is the purification or purgation of emotions, particularly fear and pity through art, and hamartia, which is this error of judgment or mistake that is often displayed by, let's say, the central character or the tragic hero of a tragedy. He insisted that literature is all about character, it's revealed through action. The next critique of note is Sir Philip Sidney, the Elizabethan poet and courtier. He wrote the work An Apology for Poetry, which is published in 1580 as a response to Stephen Gosson's The School of Abuse. This particular work addressed the function of poetry, where he says poetry is superior to everything and even higher than philosophy. According to Sidney, the primary aim of literature is not to preach morality, rather, it is to give pleasure to the reader. Moral purpose is only subordinate to this aspect of pleasure. And then comes Samuel Johnson, who is known for Lives of the Poets and Preface to Shakespeare. In Johnson, one can trace the beginnings of practical criticism. He was, in fact, the first to offer a detailed commentary on the work of a single author. When we come to the Romantic era, there were poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley, and Keats who had the fair share of opinion about literature. In Preface to Lyrical Balance, the work that launched the Romantic movement in literature, written in collaboration with Coleridge, Wordsworth elaborates on the subject matter and the language of poetry. According to him, nature is one of the prime subjects of a romantic poetry, and the language of poetry, according to him, should be the language of common man. He, in fact, draws a very close resemblance between the language of prose and the language of poetry. According to Wordsworth, poetry, in a quote, is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, end quote, and it is emotion, quote, recollected in tranquility, unquote. When Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote Biographia Literaria, he in fact directly addressed and countered the number of ideas that were contained in Wordsworth's preface to Lyrical Balance. He insisted on differentiating between the language of prose and language of poetry. He believed that language has this fictive quality, which is the result of imagination that you find in literary works, and this fictive quality is what renders it its beauty or the effect of aesthetics. P.V. Shelley wrote A Defense of Poetry, where he elaborates on how poetry strips the veil of familiarity from the world, presenting everything as extraordinary. Whereas John Keats is not known to have written any formal literary theory, but he did reflect on poetry in a number of his letters. A term coined and popularized by Keats was negative capability. It is this ability of a man to be in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without always searching after truth or fact or, let's say, reason. Coming to the Victorian era, we have Matthew Arnold, who is known for his work, The Function of Criticism in the Present Time, and the Study of Poetry. Arnold saw literature as a replacement for religion because of the social cultural setup of the Victorian era, with the church going corrupt. and the lifestyle changing, he saw a larger potential in literature for bringing about reformation in the life of people. Now, about literature, he advocated the notion of close reading. According to Arnold, a critique is to help people recognize the best that has been known and thought in the world. Arnold insisted that literature should remain disinterested, as in not influenced by any other opinion or subjectivity. In fact, the goal of criticism, according to Arnold, was to attain this pure objective knowledge, to appreciate, and I quote, the object as in itself it really is. He was the person who advocated this notion of touchstone as in the standard or criteria or yardstick to measure the quality of something. Arnold insisted on using the aspects of literature of past, that's the literary works written by great masters, as a means or touchstone or the standard or even the criteria to measure or assess the quality of literature of the present. Following him, we have George Eliot and Henry James, and T.S. Eliot, who is known for certain path-breaking ideas of his, including dissociation of sensibility, which is mentioned in the Metaphysical Poets, poetic impersonality, mentioned in tradition and individual talent, and objective correlative, mentioned in an essay on Hamlet. Now, by dissociation of sensibility, T.S. Eliot talks about a certain characteristic of 17th century poetry where the poets often separated their intellectual thought from the experience of feeling. They never united their thought with their emotive experience. Now, what does he mean by poetic impersonality? It stands for this notion that the poet, the man, the general man, the common man, and the poet who is the artist, they are two different entities. So this writer would have two distinct personality. One has got nothing to do or should not have anything to do with the other. Now, talking about objective correlative, T.S. Eliot states that a writer can actually appropriate a combination of images, objects, descriptions, or events so that he can bring about the right response, emotional response from the reader. For example, in Virginia Woolf's novel To the lighthouse is used as a tool, a means to evoke an appropriate response from the reader. Now, following T.S. Eliot, we have in 20th century the three engineers, the pioneers of change, the professors in Cambridge University, I.A. Richards, William Emerson, and F.R. Lewis. So let's take a look at the contributions by I.A. Richards. He pioneered what we know today as practical criticism. In fact, one of his work is titled Practical Criticism that came out in 1929. Another one is the Principles of Literary Criticism in 1924. He adopted a decontextualized approach to literature, which is where you separate a literary work from its context. Now, what came to be known as practical criticism in Britain and was practiced from 1930s to 70s was known by the name New Criticism in America. Now, this approach was all about close study of literature, where you separate the text, the literary text, from its history and all other context, and you analyze only the words, only the verbal aspects given on the page. Now, this is what evolved as liberal humanism or the tenets of liberal humanism. Now, following I.A. Richards, we have William Emerson, who was a student of Richards, and he's best known for his work, Seven Types of Ambiguity, which was published in 1930. Now, in this work, he talks about seven different types of verbal ambiguity. Ambiguity as in when the meaning of a word, a phrase, or a statement is not explicitly or clearly defined. So one word or one statement could have multiple meaning or could be understood differently. That is basically because language is a slippery medium. I say something and it's understood as something else, or I say something and I mean something quite different when I say it. So there are multiple semantic possibilities or multiple possibilities of meanings for individual words. So William Emerson insisted on extreme close verbal analysis of literary works and poetry. Now, the next person that we are going to look at is F.R. Lewis. He is known for the work The Great Tradition, published in 1948, which is a critical survey of English fiction. Is believed in the higher function of literature. In fact, he extended this close reading method beyond poetry to novels and other literary materials. He also believed that it is a precondition to ensure the health of a society that you should study and appreciate literature. So, this is where liberal humanism begins. In the next lecture, we will talk about the 10 tenets or principles of liberal humanism. That's it for today. Thank you for patiently listening.